In our consideration of how to evaluate industries, we also want to talk about complementary assets. What we mean by complementary assets are both the tangible and the intangible resources that are needed to compete effectively within an industry. Tangible assets are typically things that can be measured, that can be viewed, that can be acquired and or given to others. And it's things like money, it's equipment, it's real estate, and other fixed assets. Intangible assets are things that are of great value and that they are still an asset, but they're a bit more difficult to measure. They're a bit more difficult to see. It's things like knowledge. It's things like relationships. And not only the quantity of relationships, which are fairly easy to measure, but the quality. When we look at patents and when we look at brands, these might sit kind of between the two. Patents are typically a written document, and it's something that is transferable, but it's not just the value of the paper that the patent is based on. It's the know-how and the concept and the idea itself. Brands, very similar. You could print the logo of a popular brand or the logo of a popular company and have something that's tangible that's written on, but it's not just, again, the paper or the bag or the shirt that dictates the value of that brand. It's much larger than that. It's about the emotions, the relationships, what the brand means to us. And so in that way, we'll talk about complementary assets and what you can do to build these within your firm. And when we think about the source of advantage, and we'll look at both the tangible and the intangible, knowledge, relationship, and financial, what do you think's the most important? If you had to pick one that was going to be your priority as an entrepreneur. Knowledge, relationship, or money?
It's relationships.
Relationships. Why relationships?
Because if you don't have the knowledge or the money, you can find people who have the knowledge.
Okay. The relationships can be an avenue to the other two. If I don't know something, but I know people, I may be able to find the answer. If I don't have money, but I know people, I should be able to find the money. Inversely, if you have knowledge, but you don't know anybody and you don't have any money, you're just smart. If you have money, but you don't know anything, and you don't know anybody, you're just rich. But if you have the relationships, then you can leverage that in the other two and be an entrepreneur. When you look at how do you do this, who's on LinkedIn? You have a LinkedIn profile. Shameful. One person. Two people. You should close your Facebook, delete it, remove it, stop using it. Your mom's watching what you do anyway. Create a LinkedIn profile. And what you can do with LinkedIn is you can know people and get to know people, and you create a profile better than your Facebook of where are you going for lunch today, or what do you think about this or that current event, of what do you know, what have you done, where have you done it, and it's a resume of sorts that you can go through and you can highlight to whatever extent you desire of what you've done, where you've done it. That's part of it, creating your profile. The better part of it is your network. And it's a web-based index that is free. So again, this is a free tool where you can keep up with people and or connect with new people. So in this model, I have 904 contacts, and I will count a contact as better than a friend. Why are they a contact? Why does LinkedIn call it a contact and not a friend?
Sounds more professional.
It's more professional. So this is like the old man's Facebook. This is what we use to look at and talk about and find people.
typically for business-related interest. And what you can also do is, geographically, if you're going somewhere and you want to touch base or connect with people that are there, you can meet folks in the 37 countries that you know people.
These people just you know professionally?
Yes. Well, professionally and personally, depending on how you do it. So even parts of the world I've been to Greece. I haven't been to any of these other areas. So how do I know people here? To what extent you can see it. So I'm in the Middle East. I'm in Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, Azerbaijan. How do you know people in places you've never been? You met them somewhere else. And again, recognize people today in this room, 80% you'll never see again. For some of you, our friend from Idaho, unlikely you'll ever see any of these people again. So sad. But it's not to say you can't stay in touch with people and you can't meet up and find one another later, or at least stay connected. But again, rarely are we in the same place at the same time with a group, a class group, a group from college, a group from work, once you leave that office, ever again. Much easier to stay in contact with people that you know than to try and meet new people. Does that make sense? So in that way, this is a platform whereby you can do that. And what you can also do beyond location is either search for a certain company or index and just browse who you know where. So I searched in the name box. If you search in the company box, so I know 3 people that work at Facebook. One I know as an alumnus of the university. His wife works here now. The second I know from business school. The third I know as a former student. So what you can also do, when you think about these elements of relationships and capital, is look
Google.
And just index where you know people. Now going beyond that and thinking about knowledge, there is a quarterly index that's done by PricewaterhouseCoopers called Money Tree that looks at venture capital investing in the U.S. It's free. You can go online. You can download these quarterly. It's typically 10 or 15 pages. And they detail what are the different industries and which venture capitalists and what region, at what stage, at what dollar value have various investments been made in startups. The top 6 represent about 80% of the money this last quarter. So software, biotech, medical devices, media, networking, and consumer products. Even if you take consumer products out, software, biomedical, media, networking is about 75% of the total money. What do we know about what those industries have in common other than being technical? They're what? They are growing. So you typically see investors invest in growing markets. What else do we know about them? What do you need to be effective in competing within them?
There's a high learning curve.
Louder?
There's a high learning curve, so you need to be.
There is a high learning curve, and you need some knowledge. You don't necessarily wake up this morning and say, hey, I think I have a software solution to integrate with mobile this and communications that, and there's some web, and there's some this, and there's some the other, and I'm just going to make it happen. If, however, you wanted to start an online retail shop, and you have a novel idea, and you find inventory, you go to Alibaba or you go to some other site, and we've had some students do this and do it moderately well. but this is one of the most successful cupcake shops, certainly in D.C., and I would argue probably in the nation. So it's nice, it's pretty. Some people say it tastes good.
It tastes very good.
Yeah, they're a few dollars each.
The line's like 3 hours too.
Yeah, the line's out the door. They're opening a new one in L.A. $2.75 each. Lots of good flavors and such. Their online pricing might be different than their in-store pricing. I'm not sure.
Their in-store's
$3.50 in-store.
and that's if you get in.
So these are the founders. And they started 2008. So relatively young firm. So they talk about the grandmother and tradition of baking and so. Both of these, or at least one of them, was a marketing executive before she started doing this. What's that tell you about where they put their money?
In marketing?
In marketing. They hired some of the top ad agencies. They hired some of the top PR and communications firms. They set their sights on TLC to get a TV show focused on them. And they built their brand. Now the product has to be at least good enough. But you don't end up in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, the Today Show, Martha Stewart Show, Oprah, by accident. That's some hired guns, some hired marketing team that's working on your behalf to get out there and make it happen. They started with a significant amount of capital and built their brand. Their stores, let me see if we can get back to. Their store is at the corner of M Street and 33rd, I believe it is, which is about a $18,000, $20,000 a month retail space. So not inexpensive, and the design and the build out, I don't know the number on this, I would say, without really being able to see their kitchen, potentially $75,000, potentially $100,000 in building out the space. So again, they're not building a house. But when you think about the cost of building a house, they are building the inside of a house when you're renting space like that and then completely redoing it in this very custom way. I would argue that you can compete effectively in that market if you have enough money. And there's a restaurateur out of Philadelphia, Stephen Stark, that's just opened some restaurants here in D.C. It's like his 32nd restaurant or something, all high-end kind of places, has a lot of money. Takes money to get the real estate and the build out and hire these executive, almost celebrity chefs. Hard to compete for a lot of startups in that space unless you have a lot of money to get moving with. I think you can learn how to make good cupcakes. So the knowledge piece, I would argue, is not necessarily rare. But if you have the money, you can hire the marketing talent. But you have to have the awareness of that. And you, again, have to have the motivation to think that that's money well spent. A lot of entrepreneurs are shy to invest in marketing. They think great products sell themselves. So instead of competing on money, I would try and compete again on knowledge and on relationships. Who do you know? What problems are they encountering? Do you have some ideas for how to solve them that you could commercialize and market? And when we think about money, what this shows is that startup money often comes from the founders. We hear a lot about venture capital and Silicon Valley investment firms, but that's only about 4% of the money that goes into startups. Now, they invest an awful lot in tech startups, the high growth, I need a lot of money to do something. But when you think about startups that are out there, when you think about new companies that you see, what come to mind when you walk up and down Route 1? What kind of businesses do you see? You see a lot of restaurants. You see, what else? You see some degree of real estate, apartments, things of that nature. What else do you see? What else?
Malls.
You see retail. And you see dry cleaners. And you see barbershops. And you see other services-based companies. And a lot of them are funded in this personal savings, family members, partners, to some extent bank loans. But even with banks, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, it's difficult money to access as well. And we'll talk about why. But the element here is, again, oftentimes it takes a little bit of money to get moving. And oftentimes it's some of your money that gets the ball rolling, and then you're able to raise other money from there. What we're also seeing is kind of a new trend, a new surge in crowdfunding, whereby, as we had talked about with Kickstarter, there's a model where you give a donation, or you get some reward, or you buy in advance. There's another model of lending, where instead of me putting my money in the bank and getting 1% interest, and you borrowing money from the bank and paying 8%, I'm going to lend you money directly for 4%. So I make a bit more, you pay a bit less, and there are platforms that are coming online that do this peer-to-peer lending. And there's equity of let me post my venture opportunity online, and if you'd like it, if you want to buy shares in it, just like you buy shares in Microsoft, if you think it's going to go up, you can buy shares in my company. Now, that in the U.S. is a factor of some recent legislation that's still being enacted, but it's already going on in the UK and in France. So it's expected here relatively soon.
So if you're just a donator, is there any penalty if the company doesn't succeed?
If you donate money, it depends on the platform. So with the Kickstarter, for example, if they say we want to raise $10,000 and you want to give $1 or $2 or $3, or you're going to give them $10 and they're going to send you a coffee mug with their logo on it, they still need to meet that threshold of how much they said they wanted to raise. But it all depends on the platform and what the terms of agreement are for that. But what we've seen collectively is that when you look at all these different areas, about $1.5 billion was raised. I think that number is 2011, via these crowdfunding of individuals funding other individuals. So not banks giving entrepreneurs money, not investors in their traditional sense giving entrepreneurs money, but individuals giving $10 here and $100 there, but doing it in great volume. And that number, again, forecasted to double over the next couple of years. Pebble, the one we see there in the center, was a Canadian firm, and that's a video that we watched of the watch. So that's one of the biggest ones to date at raising $10 million via Kickstarter.
Wasn't there a movie that tried to raise money on Kickstarter?
There are many things on Kickstarter. So Kickstarter does go down this path of working to help entrepreneurs raise money in many different areas. So you'll see people doing art, and you'll see people doing music, you'll see technology, you'll see software, people writing books. And so if you're trying to discover a project, you'll see there are all these categories of art, comics, dance, design, fashion, film, video, publishing, technology. You can also do it locally by region. And if you like a Chicago friend, you like fashion, you like comics, you like music?
Yeah.
Which one? Fashion, comics, music, photography?
Music?
Music. So in that way, if you want to invest in a music startup in Chicago, if that's where you're from, you've got some options here on how to do that. And you see one here that they wanted to raise $10,000, and they raised $10,201 over the span of 30 days. And in that way, they have pre-sales, so you pay your $10 for your digital download, or if you pay more, they're going to give you a CD and a t-shirt and a host of other things. And they have some videos and a little bit about them and what they're doing and how they're going to do it. They talk a little bit about the risk inherent within it. So again, a platform, peer-to-peer, where you can do and raise money in different ways. And for something like this, I don't know that someone else is going to come out and try and launch an album. I'm not even sure what genre this is. Guitar and tambourines and such. So,
Look at the top right. It's indie rock.
I don't know what that means. So, in that sense, the likelihood of somebody stealing their idea, I'd say, is rare. One, you kind of need the lyrics. You kind of need the song. You need the performance talent. You need people that care, that have an interest. So this lends itself, I think, to something that the likelihood of getting imitated or replicated is fairly rare. And I'd be pretty surprised if that had ever happened. Now, there's some others, again, that are a bit more concerning. And they are typically in the product or maybe in the fashion space. Let's look at the technology one.
There's one that was funded 1,200%.
So here's a super awesome Sylvia's watercolor bot that appears to be something
It's a water jet machine. That's called.
that you might design on a I guess that's Sylvia. It's something where it looks like perhaps you draw on a tablet. You draw on a tablet and then the bot replicates what you drew on your tablet. Although, starting with vector art on your computer or following along as you sketch in real time, the watercolor bot dips its brush and paints before your very eyes. There is a question of, well, there is this thing called painting with these novel tools called brushes and paint that you could paint yourself. But the orientation here is that she has something that is technical that maybe if you were of the mind to try and replicate it, you could. but still there's a level of interest. Do any of us really have the interest in trying to do that?
Who gave this girl $23,000?
She's about halfway to where she needs to be and just started yesterday. Not bad.
Her name is Austin Sylvia's watercolor.
So in that way, what we're seeing is that it feels a bit silly, but eBay, what do you think the first product bought on eBay was? Product number one, bought on eBay. You know what a Pez dispenser is? It was a broken Pez dispenser, as I recall. Yes. Yes. Why would somebody want a broken Pez dispenser? They're a collector.
To be known as the first one.
So in that way, there was a Pez dispenser collector. Were you the buyer?
Antique.
There was a broken Pez dispenser sold, and you would think, well, who would want that? Well, if you can put a product in front of millions of people, it's probably going to be somebody that's going to put their hand up that wants it for one reason or another. And that's the logic of this crowdfunding, of that only 1 in 100, only 1 in 1,000, only 1 in 10,000 people are going to want it. Percentages are low, but if the populations are millions, you can make these matches. You can make these matches. So I have a 2-year-old that likes to draw. She does her little markers and the like, and we put them on a frame and we put them on the wall. Not going to let her paint.
So you got the watercolor.
I would let her do this. I would let her fiddle around with an iPad, come up with something, hit print, and out comes a watercolor. We mail it to grandma. Cheap Christmas present. Everybody has a good time. So again, there might be needs and purposes that people have that you and I don't have. And again, differentiate yourself a bit from that as well. Recognize that, again, as an entrepreneur, you want to think about market needs, market wants, market desires. Not necessarily would you use it. You might not have a need for it. You might not be in the target market. But think about, again, who prospective users and customers are, and recognize, again, while money I would put somewhat down the list of things that are unique assets, there are new ways, and we'll talk about these a little bit later.
So in summary, when you think about complementary assets that you have or that you can create within your venture, there are 3 fundamental questions I'd encourage you to reflect on. One is, what complementary assets are most critical in your industry and in your market? What is it that really dictates who's going to be able to compete effectively, and what do your competitors have? Secondly, we want you to think about your knowledge and your social capital. So what can you do within those respective areas to really get a handle on how to enhance and understand the relationships that you have with others? The third element is financial capital. And so, as we've talked about, there are many different ways to raise capital. There are many different types of money that you can get, and it really is dictated by how much you need and what you're going to use it for and a few other factors. But we want to start by, again, understanding what we want to achieve, what are some opportunities that we have to raise capital, and what's the right capital and the right timeline that we need from a financial perspective. With those 3, you'll be well equipped to understand the role of complementary assets for your firm.